Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our sessions about karma, reincarnation, and the chakras. We're working now on what does it mean to expand your consciousness, which is really actually very intimately integral to the question of what is karma and what is reincarnation. And we'll tie it all together as we go through these sessions. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your divine wisdom permeating our consciousness. Help us to feel your joy in our hearts and your spirit throughout everything. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so we're working our way through the 4 stages of spiritual development as exemplified by the original ancient tradition of the castes. The idea of this, if you imagine a society that is harmonious and uplifted, guided not by power-seeking politicians, but by wisdom-knowing saints and sages, and where even kings and rulers are true kashatriyas, which is what we're talking about now, which is selfless servants of the people. You see, this is the tradition of the yugas, where society, where the earth as a whole, the planet as a whole, has higher and lower ages. And many of the ancient truths came from these higher ages. And so in such a society, everything is organized to help us grow spiritually. So the original caste system was a direct perception of, oh, this would be the most helpful environment for this person, not to take advantage of them, but to allow them to develop in the best and most efficacious way, so that they can rise, not so that they can be trapped forever in their present state of consciousness, but so that they can have the lessons they need in order to grow. And we'll talk about this more when we talk more about karma specifically. So right now we're on the 3rd group, developmental group, which is the Kshatriya in the caste system, which is the archetype of that is the soldier. And the soldier, it sacrifices his personal comfort, even his life, for the sake of something he deeply believes in and in service to others. The ideal soldier will defend the country that he loves, the people that he loves. He will have trained to make his body and his mind strong and disciplined, and then he will die if necessary to protect what he believes in. It's not necessary, to actually act it out in that way, but those are the principles that guide the Kshatriya, and we call it truth-seeking. It's one who has begun to think not just in terms of what I can get for myself, which is what the Vaishya, the self-serving level is. I'll put out lots of energy as long as there's something in it for me. The truth-seeking person sees that I am part of a reality bigger than myself, and I ponder the meaning of it all. Secondly, as I said yesterday, discovers the joy of giving to others is actually greater than the joy of just getting for myself. And so selflessness is not coerced or done for the sake of making a good impression on others or done for the sake of buying favor with God. Selflessness is done because it rises spontaneously from the soul. Oh, I have something you need. Here, let me give it to you. And it just makes me happier to give it away than it does to keep it for myself. And this is something that's only learned by experience. This is something the Vaishya stumbles on when he begins to have abundance sufficiently that he can feel safe giving it away, or not necessarily, but he feels abundant. And therefore, if something needs something, it occurs to him that he could provide it. And at first he might be providing it out of selfish motives so everybody will think he is generous, but then he accidentally discovers that generosity is joyful. So the truth-seeking person acts generously because he's pondered the meaning of it, and he's part of a greater reality, and therefore giving is a fundamental part of my system for happiness. The third quality of the Kshatriya is that he begins to battle against the pull of the senses. He begins to struggle against the idea that matter is the only reality. Now, the characteristic point here of the Kshatriya, the truth-seeking, as opposed to the Brahmin, which is the next level, the priest, the truth-knowing, the truth-sharing, is that he's still at war. And this is why the archetype is a soldier. He's not just a soldier in an external sense, but the Kshatriya has entered into battle. But the Kshatriya has begun to understand that the real battle is not taking place in the external world. See, the Vaishya thinks he's fighting the world too. The merchant thinks he's fighting the world. He's fighting the world because everybody's trying to get for themselves and he's going to get for himself. So he recognizes that effort is required in life, which is a step up from the Shudra that tries to put out no effort. The Vaishya recognizes that effort is required, but the effort is to battle the external world, to gain control over the external world. As I was saying before, that the Vaishya's way of easing suffering is to have control over the external world. So he's battling, but he's fighting the wrong battle. He's fighting a necessary stage of development to find out, but by the time we're truth-seeking, we are ready to battle, but we realize that the enemy is within. And the enemy is the false belief that happiness comes through the senses, and that mastering the external world is where my power comes from. The Kshatriyas begin to understand that the only security there is my own consciousness. But within our consciousness, we have these conflicting forces, because especially when we're just rising into the Kshatriya level from the Vaishya level, the habit of, I have to take care of myself, I have to get for myself, it still continually rises. Now, this goes into the chakras and into karma. It's a lesson I've begun to learn, but I haven't yet learned. And also in the chakras, there are vrittis, there are magnetic whirlpools of energy based on all my lifetimes as a Shudra and a Vaishya, which is why we're never completely clean in these things until we're free, where there's still this thought that I would be happier if I went unconscious. There was this thought still, I would be happier if I just took for myself and got what I wanted. But the Kshatriyas begin to understand that I have to resist these impulses. Instead of just giving in to the impulse to drink or watch television or sleep too much, or giving in to the impulses to just, there's 5 apples on the table and I'm just going to take 4 of them. Instead of giving in to those impulses, the Kshatriya becomes a soldier, doing battle within himself for the ideals that I have come to believe in. That, just as a soldier on the battlefield may not always be courageous, and he has to struggle with his own disinclination to be noble and heroic, so the Kshatriya, as a truth seeker, has to struggle against our own inclinations to fall below the ideals that we have now committed ourselves to. Now, this is not failure at all. This is the process. This is what it is to be a Kshatriya. A Kshatriya goes to battle. And not going to battle is not a sign of victory. It can be a sign of not yet being engaged. So most of us are truth seekers at this point. If you're listening to this broadcast, then that would be where your life is right now. And every day we have to get up and we have to don our weapons of discrimination, of determination, of courage, of faith in God, and we have to do battle with the multitudinous elements which all live within ourselves, which are all karma registered in the chakras, which is trying to hold us to where we've always been, as opposed to where we're trying to go because of the idealism that is now awoken within us. So the basic attitude of the Kshatriya, now the basic attitude of the Shudra was indifference, of the Vaishya was what's in it for me. The basic attitude of the Kshatriya is what is true. It's a truth. You're a truth seeker. Now it's not just a question of what is comfortable for me, what does the world around me say is true, but deeply within myself we're truth seeking. What is true? And not just factually true. There's a distinction between what the facts might be and what the higher principles are. The truth seeker is looking for the principle behind everything, not just, and again, not just public opinion, not just society's ways, but deep within ourselves, what do we know to be the reality of life? And we see ourselves as part of a greater whole. We're seeking the deeper reality. So our basic attitude is what is true, and then how can I serve the highest truth that I can perceive? So what is true and how can I serve? You can see how we've progressed enormously from just seeking to put out as little energy as possible, to be willing to put out energy just if there's something in it for me, to the point now where I want to serve something enduringly true. And even the idea, the archetypal idea of a soldier giving up his life also applies in the inner battle, because often we have to sacrifice lesser pleasures, lesser desires for the sake of the highest ideal. And many times, once you have anchored yourself in truth, you have to make decisions sometimes that are very hard decisions, and they might not lead to actual physical death of the body, but certain aspirations and hopes and attachments will have to be killed. We might have an attachment to power and position, but we've begun to recognize that power and position just feed my ego and just make me more and more separate and isolated, whereas surrendering my desire for individual importance for the sake of serving, for the sake of serving the greater reality of which I am a part, you can see how it's a battle unto the death. And this is again why the archetype of a soldier is very, very important, because we have to be willing to sacrifice, many, many things that we still have an inclination for, because we now understand that what I'm really seeking will only be found if I live in conformance with these higher ideals. This is in Swami Kriyananda's Raja Yoga course, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. One of the early chapters is called Life is a Battlefield. And this is why all the great epics, spiritual epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Iliad, just all of them, they're all a battle, they're all a war. And sort of a popular feminist idea as well, it's because they were all written by men. No, that's not the reason. It's because life is a battlefield. Male, female, or whatever, gender you wish to identify with, we are always, once we become truth seekers, prior to that we're just indulging ourselves, but once we become truth seekers, we have to go to war against the habit, which is the karma that's still in the chakras, the vrittis of energy in the chakras that are pulling us back to what we used to be. We have to use our willpower to go toward what we aspire to become. The Vaishya and the Shudra, they're not talking about the meaning of life, the enduring realities, the eternal consequences. they're not thinking about things like that. And the new, especially the new Kshatriya, just sort of looks over and thinks their lives are so much easier than mine. And then there's a very funny story from several children who grew up in our Ananda village, but later chose to live actually quite successful and noble lives, but outside of the context of the ashram. They were raised in it, but it didn't prove to be deeply meaningful to them. But one of the mother of one of the children overheard a conversation between her young adult daughter at that time with one of her friends who had also grown up at Ananda and also had taken another path in her life. The two girls, who were now in their 30s, were talking to each other, and one said, "You know, our friends can just do anything they want, but the way you and I were raised, we always have to think of the deeper meaning of everything we do." So even though on a certain outward level they had repudiated it, they were Kshatriyas and they knew it. They had to always think about the deeper meaning. And even the sort of the way it was expressed was, yeah, it is tiresome. And I say this because it's perfectly natural to look in French, and I don't know how to say it in French, but there's a French expression that says, nostalgia for the mud is what the phrase is, which is that you feel this sort of sentimental longing for when life was easier. I have a friend, I think he's passed from this world now, but he was an Episcopal priest, and then he found out about these teachings, and I was the one who helped instruct him and help him become educated in this path. And we became friends. He continued to be a priest, but he also took Kriya, and he was very well educated in Christianity. And when I would have questions sometimes about the Bible, I would ask him. So there was something I read in the Bible, I don't remember, the New Testament. The details are obscure to me now. So I asked him a question about something in the Bible. And his explanation was that the full understanding of Jesus' teaching was not presented by Jesus himself, but it took like 200 or 300 years before the church basically had figured it all out and really knew what Jesus' teaching was. And I just looked at him, just waited for a moment to see if he would hear the preposterousness of what he just said, but he hadn't, because he was so steeped. I believe he had a divinity degree from Yale, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, so you're saying that Jesus actually didn't know? He didn't really. He had limited knowledge of spiritual life. And it was all those generations of priests who were smarter than Jesus. And he, of course, heard how preposterous it was, because what really happened was it took hundreds of years for them to reduce Jesus' teaching to something they could understand and quantify as church theology, and then they called it the teachings of Jesus. Yogananda himself called it churchianity versus Christianity. Well, anyway, my friend, who was very good-natured, which is why I could speak to him like that, he just looked at me and said, "My life was simpler before I met you." And of course he was joking, but he was right. His life was simpler before he met me, because I was challenging his sentimental assumptions and his just sort of unquestioned dogmas that he'd learned, as theology, without being a truth seeker. But he was a truth seeker. That's why he came to us in the first place. But you see, we have lots of unquestioned, lots and lots and lots of unquestioned assumptions where we just say the daffiest things and believe the daffiest things, not because we actually have a fundamental understanding, but because we've just been Vaishyas and Shudras, and we haven't really been soldiers questing out for the truth. So the basic attitude is, what is true? And then how can I serve that truth? And don't think for a minute that that's effortless. Not at all. We're always in this caught in the middle between the subconscious and the superconscious. Superconscious is our divine aspiration, the profound call of the infinite pulling us to our true destiny. The subconscious is everything that we've already done and already know that is comfortable and familiar to us. This is the nostalgia for the mud. And the mud means just a smaller contractive consciousness versus the challenge of expansion. And that's what we're working with at all times. We're seeking for what is true and how to serve, and then we have to pull our energy upward. That's what the whole spiritual path is. All of the techniques on the spiritual path are just how to pull our energy upward to respond to that call. So that's the basic attitude. What motivates the Kshatriya, what motivates the truth seeker, is ideals and moral truths and the aspiration to do what is right according to those ideals. The motivation for the Vaishya is what's in it for me, personal profit. The motivation for the Shudra is the fear of punishment. Just the only thing that will really get the Shudra moving is that something worse is going to happen to me than the effort to work or to put out energy. The Vaishya will put out energy as long as there's something in it for him. The Kshatriya, the truth seeker, the motivation is this is the right thing to do. Motivated by ideals and the desire to do the right thing. And we don't have to be threatened, and we don't have to be given a promise of personal reward. We'll do it because it's the right thing to do. Now, this is very interesting when this whole system is used as a template for educating children. Because in our American, in the USA, school system, the school system is set up entirely for Shudras and Vaishyas, which is fear of punishment. If you don't do the work, you're going to flunk. If you don't behave, you're going to go to the principal's office. If you really misbehave, we're going to kick you out. So the Shudra who's basically indifferent and doesn't want to put out energy might put out energy for fear of the punishment that's going to come. So the school is set up to punish. Then the school is set up for personal reward. If you work hard and get A's and do extracurricular things and get your resume, then you'll get into a good college. And when you get into the good college, you'll get a good job and then you'll get money. I mean, that's the story. And you're supposed to do it because there's some reward in it for you. Now, if a child is born with a higher vibration of consciousness than that, they're demeaned by the threat of punishment, and they're disinterested in personal gain. And there's almost no idealism in our educational system. It's been legally driven out, because if it looks at all like religion, it's not allowed. And essentially what's happened in the USA school system is that atheism has become the religion, because anything that hints at God is against an atheistic point of view. So where do you get idealism? Which is why many very fine people are completely disillusioned with school, completely uninterested in it. They just think, what does this have to do with me? And in our Education for Life school system, we try to understand what the essential motivation of the children is, and not insult them by saying, if you sweep the classroom, I'll give you a bar of chocolate. You say, well, why don't we sweep out the classroom, because it'll make the other children happy if we do this. It makes the whole classroom sparkle and everybody can learn better. Let's sweep out the classroom because we take turns sweeping out the classroom, and now it's your opportunity to do it. You speak to them about the ideal involved, the principle involved. We do mathematics because of the joy of finding the truth of it. And we do it with a positive and an uplifted attitude. One of the girls in our community many years ago, when I still lived at Ananda Village, at that time we didn't have high school. And so when she got through the 8th grade of the Ananda school, she went into the nearby town and went to the public high school there. And soon after, it said her name appeared in our community newsletter saying that she'd been on the honor roll. at the high school, which was no surprise. She was a bright girl. But I saw her and I said, well, congratulations, that you got on the honor roll. She laughed. She said, you have no idea. She said, it's ridiculously easy going to this school. She said, when I was at the Ananda school, she said it wasn't just a question of whether, let's say, I could do the math problem. I also had to work at it diligently. I had to understand the principle behind it. I had to be willing to help my classmates if they needed the help. I needed to be cheerful while I was doing it. She said, at the high school, I just give them the right answers. That's all they care about. Because it's just a system of, reward. You do the right thing, you get the A. In our school, we are trying, and we are still, some 50 years later, we're trying to raise people up to their highest potential. And even if they don't begin at a Kshatriya or a Brahmin level, we try to move them through, the lower ways of understanding, motivate them by what motivates them, but always with the idea that we're all growing towards something. You see, this is the whole principle of karma and reincarnation. It's not that we just incarnate and incarnate and incarnate and just sort of endlessly have these experiences. We're growing towards something. We're coming in to learn the lessons we don't know. And the lessons we don't know have to do exactly with this. What motivates me? What's my basic attitude? And then the other question, which you might not even know to ask until you reach the truth-seeking age, was, is this really what I'm seeking? Is this really what my heart is longing for? Or is this just the habit of the world around me? Just what people are telling me is true? You see, you have to become a truth seeker, especially in this day and age, because almost no one is. They're just happily living as Shudras and Vaishyas and think that that's fine. And when you start asking these deeper questions, just like my friend's daughter was, our friends can do whatever they want. But we have to always ask about the deeper meaning. And the reason we do that is not to punish people, but just the opposite. Because what the heart really longs for will not come until we align ourselves with the greater reality. And so when we finally start asking, what is true? How can I serve? How can I do what is right? Swamiji was once at some New Age conference and everyone was talking about self-acceptance and so on like that. And Swami got up and he said, the only way to truly accept yourself is to have a clear conscience. And it was just such a simple statement. We can pretend that when we're violating what we know to be true, and even the Vaishya and the Shudra knows it, because we're souls. We're not just brains. We're divine beings. And when we violate our own higher nature, that's your conscience. Some part of you knows it. And even if you try to silence it on a deeper than conscious level, it pulses. This is the superconscious always pulling us to higher realities. And the more joyfully and positively we respond, the sooner that which our heart is longing for will be fulfilled. God bless you, my friend.